My brother stole our clients and tried to destroy my business. So I built a better company alone, and now he's begging for a job I'll never offer. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for years, I thought my relationship with my brother Mark was built on trust. We started a business together with nothing but ambition and the belief that we were a perfect team. I was the one who did all the groundwork researching, meeting clients, writing proposals, you name it. Mark was the face of the operation. He had that charm, that easy smile, and the gift of making people feel like they'd known him forever in just a few minutes. But it wasn't just charm. He was clever, too, in his own way. He knew how to sell the vision, how to promise the world without having to put in the hours to deliver. At first, I didn't mind. I knew what I was getting into. I was willing to carry the load. We were brothers, after all, and I believed in the dream we were building. Mark's strengths were complementary to mine, or at least that's what I convinced myself. But as the months went by, I started noticing something. He wasn't carrying his weight. Every time we met with a potential client, I'd be the one handling the details. I'd spend hours drafting contracts, mapping out budgets, and chasing down leads while Mark went out to lunch with our clients, schmoozing them, talking big ideas, and taking credit for the work I was putting in to everyone else. We were this perfect duo, successful brothers who had it all figured out. They'd see Mark's confident smile, hear him pitch the business like he was born to do it, and they'd say, "Wow, you two are unstoppable." But behind closed doors, I felt the tension building. I didn't mind him taking credit at first. After all, it was a team effort, right? But as time went on, it started to sting. I worked late nights while he'd leave the office at 5 p.m., claiming he had family stuff to do. He'd pat me on the back, telling me I was doing a great job, but I was beginning to feel like the only one doing the real work. He wasn't lazy. He was just ... coasting. And every day that went by, I could feel it eating away at me. I began to wonder if the business was really ours, or if it was just mine. And he was along for the ride. The truth was starting to settle in my stomach like a stone. Mark wasn't just relying on me. He was using me. But I didn't want to admit it. Not yet. Not to myself. As the weeks went by, the cracks in our partnership became harder to ignore. The business was growing, but it was starting to feel like I was the only one pushing it forward. Mark, ever the smooth talker, started taking on bigger clients, but the reality was he wasn't managing them. I was one afternoon. I walked into the office after a long meeting with a potential investor. I was exhausted, my head buzzing with numbers and projections. But when I opened the door, there was Mark chatting with a client we had just landed. I watched from the doorway as Mark, with his usual grin, nodded along to the client's demands, making promises that we hadn't even discussed yet. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized he was making commitments I knew we couldn't keep, promising services and timelines we hadn't even planned for. "Hey man, everything good here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it felt like my heart was pounding in my throat. Mark looked up at me, eyes wide with feigned surprise.
"Oh yeah.
"Just going over a couple of things with Steve. You know, all that stuff we talked about," he said, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "You're all set, right? We've got this under control." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, sure." But my mind was racing. We hadn't talked about anything. He had made promises without even checking in with me. As the days went on, the tension only grew. I kept finding myself left out of decisions that directly affected the company. There were meetings I wasn't invited to, emails that came through addressed only to him, and new clients I hadn't even met yet. Every time I asked Mark about it, he would brush it off with a chuckle. "Don't worry, I've got it covered," or "I handled it, it's fine." But it wasn't fine. I was doing the heavy lifting, and he was taking the glory. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how long this had been going on. Every time we celebrated a milestone or signed a new deal, Mark was front and center doing the talking, making sure everyone knew it was his vision. Meanwhile, I was in the back, doing the work no one else saw, and it was starting to eat away at me. I tried to brush it off at first. "We're brothers," I kept telling myself. "It's normal. He'll come around." But the resentment was slowly starting to build, and the anger that came with it was like a quiet storm ready to break. Then one night, after a particularly long day of dealing with one of our most demanding clients, I overheard Mark talking to a friend on the phone in the other room. The words hit me like a slap. Yeah, man, it's crazy how much I'm doing to keep this thing afloat. My brother's great and all, but he just doesn't get the big picture. I'm the one making the real moves here, trust me. I froze. My chest tightened, and the world seemed to go quiet. The sting of his words was sharper than I expected. I thought he saw me as a partner, his equal. But to him, I was just some worker in the background, carrying the weight while he took all the credit. The truth finally hit me like a freight train. He wasn't just coasting, he was actively pushing me out. And if I didn't do something soon, I might lose everything we'd built together. I didn't know how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed. But one thing was for sure, wasn't going to let this slide. Not anymore. The next few days were a blur of simmering anger and the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at my insides. I couldn't shake Mark's words from that phone call, and each time I saw him flash that same easy smile, I felt the weight of it pressing down harder. The worst part was, I didn't know how to confront him without everything falling apart. We were supposed to be partners brothers, but somehow it felt like I was fighting alone. Then the breaking point came. We had been working on a major contract for a potential client, one that could set us up for months. I had been the one on the phone with them for weeks, ironing out the details, listening to their needs, and negotiating the terms. Mark, as usual, was out at lunch with a different client, but I didn't mind. I had it handled. Or so I thought. I showed up to the office that morning, only to find a meeting already set up with the potential client, and guess who was sitting at the head of the table? Mark, hey, what's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, but my stomach was already sinking. Mark flashed me his trademark grin. Oh, nothing. Just closing the deal you've been working on. It's all good, right? I handled it for you. My blood went cold. You what? I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. I took the meeting. You've been swamped, man. I figured I'd step in, show them the value of what we can do. They love the vision, Mark said, leaning back in his chair like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt my fists clench. The reality of it hit me harder than I expected. He'd taken the one thing I'd worked tirelessly for and stolen it from under my nose. This wasn't teamwork. This was him taking the credit for everything, pretending like he was the one putting in the effort while I was left in the shadows. The worst part, the client was about to sign a massive contract, and I wasn't even in the room to witness it. I can't believe this, I muttered, barely able to control my anger. Mark looked at me with a half smile, clearly amused by my reaction. What's the big deal? We're in this together, right? I just took care of it for you. His tone was casual, like he was doing me a favor, but that was the moment I realized that we were no longer equals. He was treating me like an afterthought. I had spent all those hours building the foundation, and he had swooped in to reap the rewards without lifting a finger. In that moment, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep working for someone who didn't respect the work I was putting in. I'm done, I said, my voice a little steadier now, though the weight of what I was about to say felt like a stone in my chest. Mark's grin faltered. What? Come on, you're being dramatic. We're a team, man. You know that. I'm done. I don't want to be part of this anymore, I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. This isn't how it was supposed to be. You've taken everything I've worked for and turned it into your own personal show. I'm out. I turned and walked out before he could say anything else, before he could try to spin it into something that made him look good. I left the office feeling a mixture of rage and relief. I didn't know what was next for me, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to keep letting Mark walk all over me. The decision felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. But at that moment, I knew I was finally standing up for myself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope that I might actually be able to build something better on my own. But as I stepped out into the crisp morning air, the reality of what had just happened settled in. I had just broken the one bond I thought was unbreakable, and I had no idea how I was going to fix it, or if I even wanted to. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to figure out what came next. The relief I'd felt in leaving Mark behind quickly gave way to a crushing reality. Without the business, I had nothing. It had been our dream, our future. I had poured every ounce of my energy into it, and now it was all falling apart. But no matter how bad things felt, there was no turning back. The betrayal had been too deep, too raw. I decided to take some time away to think, to regroup. I found a small cafe I'd been to a few times before, hoping the change of scenery would clear my head. But the quiet was soon interrupted by a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was one of our longtime clients, Lisa. She was a small business owner who had been with us from the start, and I had always been the one to handle her account. I picked up the phone, trying to sound casual despite the knot in my stomach. "Hey Lisa, how's everything going?" I said, forcing a smile into my voice. Her response was immediate and blunt. "Not great, actually. We've been trying to get in touch with Mark for the past week, but no one's responding. Is everything okay on your end?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, no one's responding?" Lisa hesitated before speaking again. "Well, we've been getting emails and calls from Mark about switching to a different payment plan. I thought it was strange, especially since we never discussed anything like that, so I just wanted to check in with you." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew exactly what was going on. "Lisa, I'm so sorry. Let me look into it and get back to you as soon as I can," I said, though I was already feeling the weight of what was about to happen. I hung up and stared at the phone for a moment, struggling to breathe. I had seen it coming, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. Mark had been reaching out to our clients, offering them better deals, lower rates, whatever it took, to pull them away from me and take the business for himself. I should have known. He wasn't content with just undermining me. Now he was actively trying to destroy everything I had worked for. I couldn't let this slide. I grabbed my jacket and rushed back to the office, my mind racing with the inevitable confrontation that was about to happen. But when I arrived, the office was eerily silent. The lights were off, and the door was locked. I stepped inside, but it was empty. No sign of Mark. No sign of anyone else. It hit me like a wave. Mark had already moved everything out. Clients were gone. The phone lines were disconnected. The website was down. The business I had built was already slipping through my fingers. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the rage that was swelling inside me. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. I could feel the panic rising in my chest as I sat down at my desk, staring at the empty space where our shared vision had once lived. My phone buzzed again. Not was another client. This time, it was Jake, one of the larger accounts we had. The message was short, but it cut deeper than any words could. "We're moving forward with Mark's new company. Thanks for everything." I dropped the phone onto the desk, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was too much. Mark hadn't just stolen clients, he'd stolen my livelihood, my future, and the trust we'd built. And there was no denying it anymore. He had completely cut me out. I was alone. That was my rock bottom. The moment where I realized that everything I had worked for had been taken from me, and it felt like there was nothing left to hold on to. The business was gone. My brother had taken everything, and I had nothing. But as the anger simmered in my chest, a fire began to burn Britera. Fire that wasn't going to let this go. I had been betrayed, yes, but I was done being the victim. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. I just had to figure out how to rebuild. On my own, without Mark. But deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning. There was no way I was going to let him get away with this. The question was, how was I going to make him pay? For the next few days, I walked through life in a haze. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my chest tight with the weight of everything that had happened. The business, the betrayal Mark's words and actions echoed in my head over and over. I couldn't get away from it, no matter how hard I tried. I had been left with nothing but the wreckage of my dreams. Every morning, I sat at the same desk, staring at the empty office around me, unsure of what to do next. But I couldn't just let it all slip away. I couldn't let Mark take everything from me and walk away scot-free. One afternoon, after days of agonizing over what to do, I decided to take a step forward. I wasn't going to wait for some miracle. If I wanted to rebuild, I needed to do it on my own. I started drafting a business plan, new vision, one that didn't have Mark's name on it. But as I began working, the door to the office opened, and there he was. Mark, my heart sank. I hadn't seen him since the day I'd walked out. I didn't know what to expect, but nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. "Hey, man," Mark said, leaning against the doorframe with a casual grin. "You don't mind if I take a look around, do you?" I'm thinking of bringing a few people in to, fix things up a bit." He didn't wait for a response, just walked in like he owned the place. My fists clenched. The anger I'd been trying to suppress all week exploded inside me. "Fix things up," I spat, standing up from my desk. "You've already ruined everything," Mark shrugged, as if he couldn't understand what the big deal was. "Come on, don't act like you didn't see this coming. You were too focused on the small stuff." I'm thinking big. This was always my vision anyway. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, and I knew if I didn't get out of there, I was going to lose control. "Get out," I said, my voice barely containing the fury. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my reaction. "What's your problem, man? I'm here to help. We're family." "No, Mark," I said, stepping toward him, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "You're here to take what's mine. You've been taking everything from me, and I'm done. You don't get to do this anymore." Mark's grin faltered. "You're acting crazy. Just let it go. This whole thing was never about you. It was about what we could build together, and you're too stubborn to see that." "You never wanted to build anything together," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You've been using me from the start. You've been taking everything I've worked for while you've been playing the part of the charismatic leader. I'm done with it. I'm done with you." For the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in Mark's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled loudly. "All right, fine, but don't say I didn't try. You'll be sorry when you see how this plays out. You're just not cut out for it." I didn't have the energy to argue with him anymore. I had to face the reality he wasn't going to change, and neither was I, as much as I had tried to make it work. Mark was always going to be Mark, and I was never going to be enough for him. "Just leave," I said quietly, the fight draining out of me. "I'm not going to do this anymore." Mark lingered for a moment, as if weighing his next words. Finally, he turned and walked out without another word. I sat back down at my desk, feeling the weight of everything I had lost. The business, the dream, the family bond, the betrayal, the lies. It all felt suffocating. I couldn't even bring myself to be angry anymore. I just felt numb, and then, like a switch flipping, something changed in me. I wasn't going to let this define me. I had lost everything, but I still had one thing left: my drive. My hunger to prove that I could do this without Mark, without anyone else. I pulled out the business plan. I had started earlier and looked at it, my eyes burning with determination. I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me and walk away. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I knew one thing. I was going to rebuild better, stronger, on my own terms. And this time, no one was going to take it away from me. Mark's betrayal had cost me everything, but it had also shown me something I hadn't realized before. I was capable of far more than I ever gave myself credit for. And when I finally made it, when I stood tall, with my own success under my belt, he would know that he'd regret the day he crossed me. But that was a story for another time. Right now, it was time to rebuild. Time to rise from the ashes. The next few weeks felt like a blur of hard work and crushing loneliness. I threw myself into the new business, each day pushing through the exhaustion, the doubt, and the anger. I had to do this. I had to prove that I could rebuild everything from the ground up without Mark. But no matter how hard I worked, it felt like I was always a step behind. The first few months were brutal. I didn't have the luxury of Mark's charm to draw in clients, and I didn't have the reputation of the business we'd once shared. I started from nothing. No clients, no credibility, no safety net. It was just me alone trying to fight my way back into an industry I had once dominated. One night, after spending hours tweaking a presentation for a potential client, I found myself staring at the computer screen, barely able to keep my eyes open. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I looked down to see an email from one of our old clients, the one who had been with us since the beginning. The email was brief, but it made my heart sink. "Dear name, we're going in a different direction for our upcoming project. Best of luck." That was it. Just like that, I had lost another client. The last connection to the business I had worked so hard to build. I slammed my fist against the desk, the frustration and pain finally bubbling over. "What the hell am I doing?" I muttered to myself. "This isn't how it's supposed to be." I sat there, the weight of failure pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I thought I could do it. I thought I could start over, prove that I didn't need Mark, that I could make it on my own. But the reality was far harsher than I expected. Clients weren't lining up. The bills were stacking up. My savings were dwindling. And worst of all, I had nobody to turn to. My friends had distanced themselves. Mark's betrayal had left scars that I didn't even know how to heal. And every day felt like one more step toward inevitable failure. I wasn't just losing clients or money. I was losing my confidence, my belief in myself. The thing that had kept me going through the worst of times was slipping through my fingers. The hardest part was when I realized I couldn't even afford to pay myself anymore. I was working days doing everything I could to keep the company afloat, but I wasn't getting paid. I couldn't afford rent on my apartment anymore. I hadn't bought groceries in over a week. I started going to bed hungry just to make sure I had enough cash to keep the business running, and then, one morning, I woke up with the harsh reality. Of it all, my phone rang, and it was a call I had been avoiding for days. It was the bank. "Mr. Name, we need to discuss the status of your loan. You've missed 2 payments, and if we don't receive the full amount soon, we'll have no choice but to foreclose on the business." I froze. I couldn't breathe. My heart raced, and for a moment, it felt like the world was closing in on me. The weight of everything I had worked for was about to collapse. Mark's betrayal felt like a distant memory compared to this gut-wrenching reality. I had nothing left. I hung up the phone, leaning back against the wall. My hands shook as I wiped the sweat from my brow. I had nothing, no clients, no money, no way out. In that moment, I thought about giving up. I thought about walking away from it all. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe I'd never be able to build anything on my own. Maybe I had already failed, and there was no coming back. But as I sat there, a strange thing happened. The anger that had been festering inside me slowly began to shift. The hopelessness was still there, but something else was creeping in. It was a quiet voice in the back of my mind, telling me not to quit. It told me to keep fighting, to keep going, no matter how dark things seemed. I stood up, wiped the tears from my face, and grabbed the pen and paper on my desk. I wrote down the number one thing I needed to do: rebuild. It wasn't over, not yet. I wasn't going to let Mark or anyone else define my future. This was my fight, and I was going to finish it on my own terms, but it was going to get worse before it got better. I had to hit rock bottom to realize that the only way up was through sheer bloody determination. It was time to rebuild, starting from the ground up, and this time, nobody was going to stop me. I couldn't tell you exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the sleepless nights, the long days of relentless work, or the sting of losing everything I thought I had built. But I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Mark let alone the situation define me. I was going to come back, no matter how impossible it seemed. I started small, rebuilding one step at a time. I reached out to old contacts, some I hadn't spoken to in months, others who had stuck with us through the ups and downs. Slowly but surely, I began to piece together something that felt like a foundation again. The work was hard, more grueling than I ever imagined, but with every small win, my confidence started to return. I remember one morning, after a string of rejections from potential clients, I finally got an email from a small business owner looking for help. They needed a fresh perspective, a solid strategy. They didn't want the shiny promises Mark used to make. They wanted someone who could get the job done. Someone who wouldn't just talk about it, but would show up, put in the work, and deliver. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone immediately. I pitched like my life depended on it, because it did. It was everything I had left, the last chance I had, to prove that I could make this work. "I'm not here to sell you on some vision," I told the business owner, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I'm here to show you that I can make your business stronger, more efficient, and more profitable. If you're looking for someone who's going to treat your business like it's their own, then I'm your guy." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours, but then they spoke. "All right, let's do this." I hung up, feeling the weight of those words settle into my bones. It was just one small client, one small win, but it felt like a victory, a taste of what I could build again, on my own terms. The feeling of getting back into the game, of proving that I was capable of more than Mark had ever given me credit for it, was intoxicating. For the next few months, I threw myself into the work. I wasn't just building a business, I was rebuilding myself. I learned to navigate the challenges without anyone holding my hand. There were no shortcuts, no Mark-style charm to get me through the tough conversations. It was me, my skills, and my dedication. The work was exhausting, but with every successful contract, I felt more grounded. It wasn't long before word started spreading about the services I was offering. Slowly, clients came back, one by one, and as they did, I kept my eyes focused on my goals. I knew the road ahead would be long, but I was starting to realize something important. I didn't need Mark to succeed. In fact, this was the way it was always supposed to be. I had built this business, this success, on my own sweat and hard work. I had nothing left to prove to anyone except myself. But even as I began to feel the momentum building, I knew something else was inevitable. The day would come when I'd have to face Mark again. I had no idea what he was up to now, whether he was still running the company or trying to pick up the pieces of the mess he'd left behind. But deep down, I knew that sooner or later, he'd come back around. And when he did, I'd be ready. But for now, I had a moment to breathe. A moment to stand tall, to recognize how far I had come. I wasn't at the top yet, but I was finally heading in the right direction. At this time, nobody could take that away from me. I was building something new, and this time, it was mine. Just when I thought things were starting to stabilize, the unthinkable happened. It was a late afternoon, and I was wrapping up a meeting with a new client who had just signed on. I'd been feeling more optimistic than I had in months, thinking that my hard work was finally paying off. The office had that familiar buzz again, the feeling that maybe I had a shot at making this business exactly what I wanted it to be. But that's when my phone rang an unknown number, one I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Hello." There was a brief pause, followed by a voice I hadn't heard in a long time. A voice that immediately made my stomach drop. "Hey, it's Mark." I froze. The weight of his name hit me like a punch to the gut. It had been months since I'd last spoken to him. Months since I walked away from the company we'd built together. The thought of him had been pushed to the back of my mind, buried beneath the exhaustion of rebuilding. But hearing his voice again made everything come rushing back. The anger, the betrayal, the pain. I had worked so hard to distance myself from him, from the person he had become. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to sound composed, but my voice betrayed me. The frustration was already boiling over. "I need your help," he said, his tone surprisingly calm. "I know we've had our issues, but I'm in a bit of a bind, and I think you're the only one who can help me out of it." I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. "Help you out? After everything you did to me?" "I know," Mark said quickly, as if he had rehearsed this. "I know I messed up. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need a favor. Can we meet? I'll explain everything." My heart was pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to hang up, tell him to get lost, but another part, the part that remembered what it was like to be his brother, to have shared everything with him, was hesitant. I took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. "Fine, we can meet. But don't think for a second that I've forgotten what you did." I didn't know what I expected, but I sure as hell wasn't prepared for what happened next. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the following morning. When I arrived, I spotted him immediately standing by the door, looking almost defeated. Gone was the confident, cocky brother I had once known. This Mark was different. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes lacked the usual arrogance. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. "Hey," he said, when he saw me approach. He managed a half-hearted smile. "Thanks for meeting me." I said nothing, just gestured for him to sit. I was curious, though not in the way I once would have been. This wasn't a conversation I was having out of brotherly love. This was a transaction. I needed to know what he was up to, why he was back in my life after everything that had happened. "I'm in trouble." "Man," Mark said, his voice lower than usual. "The business? It's crumbling. I made some bad choices, some bad deals, and now everything's falling apart. I thought I could handle it, but I can't, and I know I've burned every bridge with you, but I've got nowhere else to turn." I sat there, quietly processing what he was saying. Part of me felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Here he was, the great Mark, asking me for help, asking me for something he once took from me so effortlessly. But another part of me, the part that still remembered who we were, felt the weight of his desperation. "I need you to come back," Mark continued, his eyes pleading. "I need you to help me fix this mess." You were always the one who had the vision, the skills. Without you, this thing's going to fail. I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm asking, for old time's sake. Will you help me?" The silence stretched between us. I could feel the old tension creeping back into my chest, the part of me that still wanted to help, that still cared for him as my brother. But the other part of me, the part that had been betrayed so deeply, couldn't forget the lies, the manipulation, the way he'd torn everything apart for his own gain. "You've got some nerve," I said finally, my voice cold, distant. "After everything you did stealing clients, running the company into the ground, you want me to help you now." Mark didn't respond immediately. He just sat there, looking at me, waiting for some sign that I'd come around. But I knew in that moment that there was no coming back from this. "I don't think you understand what you've done," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "This isn't something you can just fix with a phone call. You tried to destroy me, Mark, and now you expect me to come in and save you?" I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not your savior, Mark, and I'm not going to clean up the mess you made. I don't care how bad things are for you. I'm done." Mark reached out, his hand trembling. "Please, But I was already walking out the door. I wasn't going to be dragged back into his mess. I didn't care how desperate he was. I had worked too damn hard to get where I was. And I wasn't going to risk everything just to save him from the consequences of his own actions. As I stepped out into the cold morning air, I realized something. I didn't need him, and I certainly didn't need to be a part of his failure. Mark had made his choices, and now I had to make mine. It was over. For good, the walk back to my office felt different than I expected. Normally, after a conversation like that, I'd be boiling with anger, maybe even questioning myself, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But this time, there was no second. There was only the clear, undeniable weight of clarity. I realized something that had been slowly dawning on me for weeks, but had just clicked into place. It wasn't just that I didn't need Mark, it was that I never needed him to begin with. The business? It wasn't his. It was always mine, and it took losing everything for me to see it clearly. He had ridden my coattails, taking credit for my work and ideas. He'd been coasting along while I did the heavy lifting, and when things got tough, he walked away without a second thought. As I sat back down at my desk, I looked at the small stack of papers that represented my progress over the last few months. They weren't much proposals, contracts, a couple of payments from new clients, but they were mine. They represented everything I'd done on my own. And as I looked at those papers, I realized that the most important thing I had learned wasn't just about business. It was about who I was, who I'd become, and what I was truly capable of. I'd been so caught up in what I thought I had lost, so focused on the betrayal and the bitterness, that I'd almost forgotten how far I'd come. It wasn't just about rebuilding the business. It was about rebuilding myself. Every small success, every new contract, every positive email, every piece of work I did was proof that I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than I'd ever given myself credit for. And it felt good. Really good? It was around that time, during one of those late-night sessions where I was just catching up on emails, that the phone rang again. I looked down at the screen, half expecting it to be Mark, but this time it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. Double quotes. "Hello. Hi, is this name?" It was a woman's voice, unfamiliar but polite. "Yeah, this is him. My name's Rachel. I'm with company. We were referred to you by one of your clients, and we're interested in discussing a potential partnership." I froze. This wasn't a cold call or a generic sales pitch. This was a legitimate inquiry. I could feel the weight of the moment as it sank in. For all the doubts I had about whether I could rebuild, whether I could really make it on my own, this was the universe reminding me that I was on the right path, that the hard work was paying off. I cleared my throat, suddenly more focused than I had been all day. "Absolutely," I said, a smile creeping into my voice. "I'd love to hear more." We spent the next half hour discussing the details. By the end of the conversation, they were asking for a meeting the following week, eager to move forward. And as I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of triumph, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The momentum had shifted. I was no longer the guy who had lost everything. I wasn't the victim in this story anymore. I was the one writing the next chapter, and it was a chapter I was proud of. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. But that peace didn't come without a price. It wasn't just the hard work that had gotten me here. It wasn't just the endless nights or the months of grinding through rejection and failure. It was the realization that I didn't need to depend on anyone else, not Mark, not anyone to define my success. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew that. There would be more setbacks, more challenges, but I was ready for it. It wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and that was all because I had made the decision to trust myself, finally. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt in control. And for once, that felt like enough. I wasn't going to look back. I had moved on, and now it was time to take what was mine. But then, just as I was about to dive back into the work, another thought crossed my mind. Mark's words from our meeting echoed in my head. I'm in a bind. I need your help. I couldn't help but the anger. The resentment hit was still there, somewhere deep down. I knew the business I was building now was far from perfect, but I also knew it was mine. Mark had tried to take that from me. He had tried to tear it down, and he had failed. And as I thought about what had been taken from me, I knew one thing for certain. I was never going to let him take anything from me again, no matter what. That was my clarity. But there was still a decision to make. What would I do when Mark came back for more? It didn't take long for Mark to reappear, just like I knew he would. I had barely begun to enjoy the fruits of my labor when one morning my phone rang again. This time it was a text, but from a number I knew all too well. We need to talk. Please call me. It's urgent. I stared at the message for a moment, my finger hovering over the screen, considering whether I should just block him or hear him out. The old part of Mitha, part that still remembered the good times. The brother I once trusted was pulling me in. But the stronger part, the one that had spent months rebuilding, reminded me of why I walked away in the first place. Still, curiosity got the best of me. I dialed his number, the sound of it ringing too familiar. His voice was strained, not like the confident, smooth-talking Mark I'd known. There was a sense of urgency in it now. I got your message. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though a part of me wanted to let him know exactly how much I hated that he was even calling. Listen, I'm in real trouble, he said, cutting straight to the point. The company's tanking. We lost a big client, one of our main sources of income. I can't keep this afloat without help. You know, I'm not asking for a handout. I'm just asking for a shot. You've seen what I can do. I need you, man. I need you back. His words hit me like a slap. I could feel my pulse rising, the anger surging in my chest. After everything, after all the lies, the manipulation, and the way he'd tried to destroy me, he had the audacity to come crawling back. Asking for help, I paused, taking a slow breath before speaking. So, what? Now you want me to come back? To clean up the mess you created? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Mark spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost resigned. I know I screwed up. I get it. I'm not proud of it. But we built something together. We can still fix this if you just give me a chance. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I just need you to help me get through this. Please. The words hung in the air between us. I could hear the desperation in his voice, the same desperation that had once driven him to take what wasn't his, to manipulate people into believing he was the only one with the answers. He wasn't asking for a second chance for the business, though. He was asking for a second chance for himself. I'm sorry, Mark, I said, my voice steady, though there was a coldness in it that surprised me. But I'm done. I don't owe you anything. Not after what you did. Mark's voice cracked. I know, but I was wrong. I should have been honest with you. I should have treated you better. You should have, I said, cutting him off. But you didn't, and that's why I'm not coming back. You can't just expect me to forget everything you did. I'm rebuilding, and I'm doing it on my own terms. I don't need you. I never did. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Mark breathing, but he didn't respond. I stood up from my desk and looked out the window, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about self-respect, about standing my ground. I had spent far too long being the one to clean up his mess, to sacrifice everything for him. It was time to stop. You've made your bed, Mark, I continued. Now you have to lie in it. I'm not coming back to fix what you broke. You'll have to figure that out on your own. There was no response. The line went dead. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. I was just ... done. There was nothing left to say, and no part of me wanted to go back to the toxic, broken relationship we had built. I had moved on. I had built something for myself, something that didn't involve Mark, something that was mine and mine alone. But as I sat back down at my desk, the phone call lingering in the back of my mind, I couldn't ignore the fact that this wasn't over. Mark might have been down, but I knew he wasn't out. He'd be back again, and when he did, I'd be ready. But this time, it wasn't going to be me cleaning up his mess. This time, I'd be the one who came out on top, and I wouldn't let anyone, especially Mark, take that from me. The days after I hung up on Mark passed quietly, but there was a tension that lingered. I didn't expect him to give up easily. In the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't over. Mark had this way of worming his way back into my life, no matter how much distance I put between us. So, when I got the call, I wasn't shocked, but I still felt my heart skip in my chest. It was a week after our last conversation. I was in the middle of a strategy meeting with a potential new client when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I figured it was probably more sales calls. I almost ignored it, but something made me pause. I stepped out of the meeting room, the click of the door shutting behind me. I answered the phone, half expecting Mark to be calling to beg again. And I wasn't wrong. "Hey," his voice came through the speaker, sounding different this time. It was quieter, but there was still an undercurrent of that old arrogance. That same air of entitlement that made my skin crawl. I took a deep breath, already exhausted. "What is it now, Mark?" "I told you, Iman, not coming back." "I get it, all right?" Mark snapped back, the anger in his voice clear. "I'm not asking you to come back to the business, but I need you to hear me out. We need to talk. You owe me that much." I almost laughed. Owe him. I'd spent years helping him with everything, sacrificing my own dreams for his. And now he thought I owed him something? "Mark, you've already had your chance. I've been patient, but you've crossed the line too many times. I'm done." There was silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing, like he was weighing his next words. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You think I don't know what I did? You think I don't regret everything? But here's the thing, you don't get to've been making the same mistakes, too. You've built this thing up, but you're not doing it the right way. You're pushing away everyone who could help you. You're isolating yourself, and that's why you'll never succeed the way I did." I felt the anger boiling up inside me again. "Don't lecture me, Mark. You didn't just steal my clients and wreck our company, you wrecked me. You took my trust, and you crushed it. Everything I've done since then, I've done without you. And guess what? It's working. I'm building something better, something real." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "Right? Because running a one-man show is so much better than having a team behind you. You've always been too proud for your own good. You'll never see it until it's too late." "I don't need you to tell me how to succeed," I fired back, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I'm doing just fine without you. I've built this on my own terms, and that's more than you've ever done." There was a long pause. I could tell Mark was trying to regain control of the situation, but for once, he didn't have the upper hand. The power had shifted, and I could feel it. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on the defensive. Finally, he spoke again, but there was no confidence in his voice now. "You'll regret this," he said, but his words felt empty. "You'll seek an answer." I hung up the phone, the finality of it settling over me like a weight lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was closure. It was the end of a chapter I'd tried to close for so long, and now it was finally sealed. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still gripping the phone. I wasn't angry anymore. In fact, I felt lighter than I had in ages. There was nothing left for me to prove to him or anyone else. This was my life now. The success I was building was mine, and Mark had no place in it. I walked back into the meeting room, where the client was still waiting. And the rest of the day passed in a blur of new contracts, emails, and plans for the future. But in the back of my mind, I knew that was the last time I'd ever have to deal with Mark. I'd made my peace with it, and then, just before I headed home that evening, I received one last message. It was from one of my old colleagues, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. They had a simple question. "Do you want to hear what's happening with Mark's new business?" I hesitated before replying, but then, Curiosity got the better of me. I typed out a quick response. "Sure, what's going on?" The reply came moments later. "His company's going under. He's lost most of his clients, and the ones left are only sticking around because of his charm. The team's already looking for new jobs. It's a mess. He's burning bridges left and right." I didn't feel satisfaction reading those words. Instead, I just felt nothing. Mark had made his choices, and now he was reaping the consequences of them. I'd moved on, and it wasn't my problem anymore. The sun had just set, casting an orange glow through the office windows, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. It wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And no one, especially Mark, could take that away from me. The final chapter was closed, and for the first time, I was truly free. It had been a few months since that final confrontation with Mark. In that time, my business had continued to grow, and for the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by the constant fear of failure or the ever-looming shadow of betrayal. I was building something real, something that felt mine, not just in name, but in the very foundation of it. One of the most powerful lessons I'd learned through everything losing the business, rebuilding it, and finally cutting ties with Mark was that success was never just about the clients or the contracts. It wasn't even about the money. It was about how you carried yourself through the hardest moments. It was about staying true to your vision, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. And now, I was standing on the other side of it stronger, smarter, more resilient than I had ever been. But it wasn't just the business that had changed. It was me. I had finally let go of the anger and the resentment. I had stopped letting Mark's actions define my future. I didn't need his approval or his partnership anymore. I had learned to rely on myself, and that made all the difference. It was a rainy afternoon when I got the email. I had just finished a long meeting with a new potential client, the kind of high-profile deal that could propel my business into a new tier. As I sat back at my desk, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from an email address I didn't recognize at first. But as I read the subject line, "Mark's business is officially shutting down," I knew exactly who it was from. It was from one of my old colleagues, the same one who had told me about Mark's downfall a few months ago. The email was brief, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. Asterisk, I thought you should know, Mark's company is officially closing down. His last few clients left when they couldn't get the results they were promised. It's a disaster. I'm sorry, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. I sat back in my chair, the rain tapping against the window. It wasn't a feeling of victory, like I thought it would be. It was a hollow sort of recognition, proof that the consequences of Mark's actions had finally caught up to him. I felt nothing, but in the same breath, I felt everything. Relief, sadness, a strange sense of closure. Mark had burned all the bridges, and now he was the one left in the ashes. I wasn't happy about it. I wasn't gloating. It was just the way it was supposed to be. He'd tried to tear everything down, but in the end, it was his choices that had ruined him. I spent a moment just staring at the email, processing the weight of it. For a long time, I had been angry. I'd been consumed by the betrayal, by the feeling of being used. I'd been obsessed with getting revenge, with making him see the damage he had caused. But the truth was, I didn't need to destroy him. Life had already done that for me. He had already destroyed himself. The rain outside had turned into a downpour, and as I sat in the quiet office, I finally understood what it meant to be free. The past was no longer something that had power over me. I was no longer chained to the anger, the pain, or the memories of what Mark had done. The story was over. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. There was no more weight on my shoulders, no more fear of failure or regret. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it on my own. And then, just as I turned to leave the office for the evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. I hesitated seeing the name on the screen. It was Mark. I stared at the phone for a moment, the old tension creeping up my spine, but it didn't last long. I didn't need to answer anymore. His voice no longer held any power over me. His mistakes, his failures, they were his to bear, not mine. I let the phone ring out and walked out the door. The sound of the rain outside suddenly seeming like the perfect soundtrack for a new beginning. I had made it. On my own, and no matter what Mark did, he could never take that from me.